maybe we could just kind of actually start by talking about what that presentation on the kickoff call looks like for the research, and then go from there.
Biggest recommendation would be when you're presenting back this kind of data, there are going to be different people in the room and different types of clients. Some clients might not even know any of this information, and so they will probably be hanging on your every word. Other clients might have already done all of this research and perhaps even quite recently, and so you can see their eyes glaze over. And that's when you know, okay, let's kind of skip that slide, let's skip this slide. What I tend to do is if I see that little glaze coming over the eyeballs, I'll just say something like, yep, really similar story on this one, really similar motivators coming up. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but obviously I'll send you the deck so you can read through it if you need to or want to in your own time. And then I make sure that I get to the really juicy stuff, which would either be, summarizing everything from the learnings. The Reddit stuff is normally quite juicy. I normally see clients really interested in that because it's cool to kind of find that language and see just from a category perspective what people are saying. But really read the room, I would say, is my most important key takeaway. Get to the insights, the summary, have a really good summary of, if you can get it on one slide, great. The more concise, the better, but really focus on pulling out the key highlights from all the other slides. So from a perspective of what was the learning, and then what are you going to do with that? So specifically translating that into the opportunity for that client.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things on that initial call, of course, building rapport is the most important, but one of the most important things on that call is sharing the insights, but not treating it necessarily like a presentation where we're just throwing a bunch of information at a client, but treating it like a conversation, because that conversation is where their ideas start to come out, and you can really understand more about expectations that might have not been discussed during the sales process. You can start to understand more about their overall goals for the brand or for the business and their mindset behind messaging and creative, because this conversation, the kickoff call or the initial strategy call, is where you can start to get good feels of how you should prep brief 1 or brief 2, because ultimately it's going to be your ideas and your strategy for the most part, but you need to incorporate, or a creative strategist needs to incorporate, the input, the thoughts, the desires of the client, not just the client's customers, right? So this is a great opportunity to get communication and feedback. If it's like a 90-10 split where the agency's talking 90% of the time and the client's talking 10% of the time, probably not going to be too much of a fruitful conversation or call for anyone.
Totally. Yeah. One of my favorite phrases to throw about in those kind of calls is, right, I feel like I've just delivered a monologue. Jump in, any questions, any thoughts? How are you feeling about this so far? It's really important, I think, to kind of have that awareness when you're sharing this kind of information, that it's a conversation and it's not a monologue. Like you said, if it's 90% agency and 10% client, then there's perhaps something going a bit awry with that conversation. You need to spark a little bit more brainstorming together rather than you just kind of throwing things at them.
Yeah. And I think if it could even be good to set a goal of like ask a question every slide or something, right? Because just because we did the research doesn't mean we know the answers yet, right? This business owner, whether they've been in the business for a year or 10 years or 15 years, they have a lot of context and learnings that they've built up. And we as the agency, the creative strategists, are just getting started. And so we're just getting into things. And while we have a great process, and clients often tell us that they're, very happy with the level of detail in our research, pat on our own back, but they know a lot about their business and they know a lot about what might be good or bad that way as well. So we present it. The goal of this call, like I said, number 1, always building rapport, building that friendship. Number 2 is to share the insights and get that conversation started. And number 3 would be using those insights to then start to leverage the build out of the 90-day plan that we're going to do. And that 90-day plan, we do one for media buying and we do one for creative strategy. I always tell new clients and sales calls, planning 6 to 12 months would be illogical in e-commerce because things change so fast. So we like to plan on 90 days, but even then we're not stuck to the plan. We can pivot, we can move, but we like to have a plan for a couple of reasons. One, so that the client knows where we're heading. If at any point they don't know where we're going or what we're doing, we as an agency failed somewhere in communication and failed somewhere in project management and letting them know what's happening. And two, it's good to know at scale, multiple team members, what everybody's planning on doing so we can line up needs for creative, with media buying, with external vendors and things like that as well. So maybe we could just kind of talk through like the 90-day presentation deck, if you will. What are the slides on that? Like, what are the key points that we're focusing on when it comes to building out that 90-day deck or that plan?
So what I like to do on the 90-day plan is kind of go back to square one a little bit, because I think when we get so deep in the weeds to the point where looking in Reddit threads about how people are talking about dandruff impacting their lives, it can get very easy to go down a really niched, specific rabbit hole that can become really complex. And me and our copywriter, we found ourselves doing this a few times, and we have to draw ourselves back because it's, you know, you see maybe something in Reddit where it's like, this cousin's aunt's dog had this issue and then the brand solved it, and you think, oh, there's an angle there. And then you start working that angle, and then it becomes quite complex. And then you look at it and you go, I need to zoom that back out a little bit because it's getting a bit too niche. Now, naturally, with creative strategy and just marketing 101, when you try and speak to everybody, you speak to nobody, is one of my favorite things to say. So you absolutely do need to have a persona in mind. But if you're at the depths of your grandma's dog, cousin's dog, then I think that's a hint that you've gone a bit too far. So the very first thing that I like to do on the 90-day plan is go back to like the 1,000-foot view of what is the goal here. So by that, I mean, what is the goal of the customer? So it could be that they want to buy a new piece of jewelry. It could be that they want to solve their eczema. It could be that they just want to ease the pain of the dandruff. Like really, really 1,000-foot view, keep that front of mind. It's really important that we remember what's the actual basic goal here. And then we think about triggers. So what might be happening in the prospect's life that has triggered them to be wanting to achieve this goal right now? So that's where we can start thinking a bit deeper about specific use cases. The dandruff one, for example, could be like a friend pointed out that they had dandruff on their black shirt, and we found that was a really common thing in Reddit and the research, whatever it might be. But there'll be a trigger point that made that prospect want to achieve the goal. So we start at the goal, we go a bit deeper into the trigger, what kind of made them want to have this goal or solve this goal or achieve this goal. And then we kind of summarize what the main motivators were from the research. So then we start to get a bit deeper into the like emotional and rational motivators. So it's kind of a really good simplified way of like stepping into the right solution. Start with a goal, what were the triggers, and then what were the motivators that were really present within that industry and the testimonials and all of the research. And that gives you a really, really good starting point, because once you've got an understanding of all of that, it becomes quite simple. I mean, I say that it's not simple for everybody, but it's more simple than starting with a blank piece of paper. When you have those things laid out, it's really then a lot more straightforward to say, right, we know what they're trying to achieve. We know exactly what triggered them to want to achieve this. And we know what motivators are pushing these people to buy. So then it becomes just, it's almost like a puzzle. Then you think, okay, so now we know all of this. What's our message going to be? What's the key, angle or message that we're going to go for? It might be, go out in your black shirts again. It might be as simple as that. And then once you've got that message, we can then start thinking about what are the best visual ways to execute that message. And it starts to all come together. So you probably want before and after. That might work really well. So a black shirt with flakes versus a black shirt without flakes. A Post-it note image, that might work really well. Get rid of the white flakes on your black shirt, And once you start to become clear and piecing all those things together, it really starts to fall into place. And the right strategy in terms of your message and your creative execution will just jump out at you. It will just kind of come because you've got that foundation to build on.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we've been kind of thinking through recently and adding into our process is we have a process. We have a way we go about doing things. We've had those recent conversations with different people on the podcast and just, reflecting PIRs on different clients we've worked with is like not always following our process, I guess is the shortest way to put it. Of like, if the skincare brand, for example, just did a full lift with their brand messaging, and they had someone from a major US retailer for skincare, one of the top 3, that used to work there, help do their brand messaging relift and focus on the opportunities there. We would be kind of in a bad spot to avoid all of that and focus on just our own messaging strategies that we're going to do, and none of the ones that they've spent time, budget, energy, and effort to build on as well.
Totally. Absolutely. And another example would be as well, we recently onboarded a high-end jewelry client, and in their onboarding form, and this will stick with me as a creative strategist until I die. Like, in their onboarding form, we said, what are your USPs? As we do with every client. And they said, well, we don't really have any. People either connect with the jewelry and they buy it, or they don't connect with it and they don't buy it. And I read that and I was like, oh, this is going to be a toughie to crack. Like, there's USPs, there are, problems and solutions, there are outcomes that these buyers are wanting, and it's my mission now to find them. I went through all of the creative research exactly as we outlined it, like briefly that now and in the last one. And what I found completely aligned with what they put in the onboarding form. So one of the top motivators that came out for that brand was pleasure. And I've never seen that come out before. So pleasure is in people literally saying, I just love this jewelry. That was it. That was their main reason for buying. They just loved it. And all of the kind of competitor analysis was really similar, looking at competitor ads, really similar. They don't have, I was like, well, we're going to be talking about the quality of the gems. We're going to be talking about 14 karat gold. We're going to be talking about these things. No. So I had to completely flip everything on its head. And it wasn't challenging. It just really kind of put my strategic skills to the test, because like I said, we start with the message, we figure out which motivator we're going to do. And all this research was saying, and screaming at me, no motivator, no message, like let the jewelry speak for itself. The videos need to show the jewelry front and center. We need to create, build this emotional connection with the jewelry, but not through words, through visuals. So yeah, that really kind of challenged the process, and we just adjusted and pivoted.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the biggest learning experiences for me. Very early on with this agency, I was all about process. And, Facebook ads, we're still at the phase where everybody like super hyper niched on HVAC or solar panel roofers or things like that. And it was all about like, we have our own landing pages and our own Facebook pages, and you just buy into it and then we push it. And everybody was, we can onboard somebody in 30 minutes and have ads running. And it was super processed. And so I tried to emulate that because I saw a lot of people crushing it and doing well. And I feel like processes that are too rigorous or too rigid can hinder innovation. If you would have just followed our process and said, oh, this is the Brighter Click way, this is the way I have to do it, we would have focused on trying to pull some USPs out of a hat versus following what the client already knew and what we were able to kind of gather from our comprehension and our insights that way.
Exactly. And I think, if you really drill down into it, there is a motivator there, and it's probably just the pleasure one. It's the falling in love with the product. So we just have to find a way to do that. And actually what we ended up doing was getting very specific in terms of the type of UGC that we wanted briefing, having really close-ups, showing the jewelry at different angles, but close up on the hand, on the neck, that, really lifestyle type of stuff, but very close, so that people can see, so that viewers can see the detail. And then we played with mood via music instead. So we really want to create this emotional connection. So our text overlays were really, really minimal, like super minimal, like one line, like, find your new signature piece, or every piece a chapter in your story, something, a bit emotive, or just short, but not really kind of any specific USP. But we really focused in on like using music as well to create a really emotional sense. So like classical piano, string, like really slow but powerful music. So they're looking at this ring, and this client is predominantly TikTok, so we definitely had the sound first kind of in mind there for this strategy. But you scroll up, you see this beautiful jewelry, this beautiful song playing, and that's what we're trying to do, is create an emotional connection, just not with words and not with a specific motivator in mind. So I think it kind of follows the process loosely, because humans looking at behavioral psychology, the same things drive human behavior over and over again. That never changes. Cost caps, ABO, CBO, that changes on the weekly, but the creative strategy shouldn't. It's, really understanding what motivates people to buy and make any kind of decision and act in any kind of behavior. And when you understand that, it all just falls into place. And when you're focused on that, it's really hard to fail.
Yeah. And I mean, to kind of cap off that one specific client, which we won't name, but they are running that special right now, the 3-day sale or multi-day sale. They're looking at grossing $500K in 3 days off of it. So they knew what they were talking about. The research was able to help find some insights as well, and sales are just booming for them right now, which is great. So we build that 90-day plan, and then our goal is to present that to the client. And there's so much time, energy, and effort that goes into that plan. Even though we have things like ChatGPT and different things, there's just a lot of sweat equity that goes into building that plan to make sure that we do things right. So there's
still
also
got to piece it all together.
Yeah, and there's also with that a lot of buy-in from the person making it, a lot of care. Even if you say you separate feelings from work, not you, just anyone, there's still care with it, right? It's kind of like creative work. So presenting it to the client so they understand the level of detail that went into it and they understand the purpose behind it. It varies per client, right? We've had various situations where, we do X, Y, or Z, but let's just kind of talk through that really quick. How do you go about generally presenting that to a client?
So we tend to, what I tend to do here is pretty much have the 90-day plan in my head, what I want to do when I'm presenting all the creative research. So that final slide that I talked about with the key opportunities, that would basically be summarizing all the things that I want to put in the 90-day plan so that we can have a sense check from the client, whether they're cool with that, whether they're not cool with that, whether we've gone completely left field or whether we're on the right track. And then that makes the next stage of doing the 90-day plan really easy. Now, from an operational perspective, we could probably get on the call with the client every week, because in this phase, there's so much work going on from our side that we could share with the client, but we have to be efficient within that kind of the realms of operations at the same time. So when it comes to this side of the plan, like putting it all together, we know that clients love to talk about it. Of course they do. It's their brand, it's their baby. And that is where all of the wisdom kind of comes. And that's why we put so much time into that first call. But when it comes to the 90-day plan, I try and be dynamic with this, and it does depend on the client, but usually we don't get on another call for that. Usually I'll send a Loom video because there's not really anything new in that 90-day plan that they haven't already seen, because I would have already mentioned it in the creative research presentation call. If there is something, if we do, it's never happened, genuinely, not just saying that, it's never happened that we were that off track that the client had to correct us. But if that did happen, then I would absolutely get on another call to make sure that we were on the right direction with a 90-day plan. But we don't usually get on another call for that, because it's just summarizing everything that we've already talked about, usually in the research deck, into a plan. Over the last 6 months, I would say I've got more specific with the 90-day plans than the process when I first started. And that's just through a bit of trial and error, really. I think when clients come on board, they definitely have a vision in their mind of what they want. And as much as you can try and communicate that in words, it's really quite difficult. So I've started adding more detail into the 90-day plan, where I break it down by motivators. So these are the motivators we're going to focus on. So it might be, financial savings, security, trust, quality, whatever we found from the research. But then I will go into examples for each one. So I'll start with, usually we would perhaps only focus on 3 motivators in 90 days. That's probably the max, because otherwise you're not going to be able to really do any motivator any justice in terms of testing different ways of talking about it or visually executing it. So for each motivator, I'll put a few bullet points of messaging ideas so that the client can, again, have the opportunity to see which direction we're going in and jump in if they don't like it and tell us, no, we don't want to say that. That language is really not aligned with our style or our voice, or we really need to avoid the word free, but we can say this, really kind of just getting those details up front. And then after I've, for each motivator, put some messaging ideas, I then put some visual execution ideas. So that's more the creative theme side of things. So if it's, I don't know, financial savings, I'll put in there some ideas of how we want to execute that visually. And it will be things like, post-it note execution or cross out, where we cross the price out. And I'll give them examples of that as well, so they can see the whole kind of the plan in my mind as I see it. I want to share that with the client so they can see it in their mind as closely to the way I see it in my mind as possible. So they can tell me, hey, no, I don't like this. And that's totally cool. If they don't like it, that's great feedback for me to know right now, because it means I'm not going to spend all my time briefing it to give it to my designer, to then spend a load of time executing it, to then have to start again. So this 90-day plan, I've got more and more detailed, I think, as the time has gone on. And I really kind of give them a sneak preview, I guess, of what this is going to look like when it comes to you, with examples. And I can't stress that enough, like with examples. So use foreplay boards, use screenshots, whatever it might be, so they can see visually in their mind exactly what you mean. But there's no ambiguity there when you give them an exact example. And then they have the opportunity to say, no, I really, really hate that. That's really off brand. Or heck yeah, we've never done anything like this. I'm super pumped. Oh, I can't hear you.
I had myself muted there. And I think it's worth calling this out. Something that I thought of while you were saying all that is just a call out for agency owners. This process, while every client should have it, not necessarily a process with the level of detail and hours that get put into it that you would use for a client that's paying you $500, $1,000, $1,500 a month for Facebook ads, even $2,000 a month for Facebook ads. If you're on a month-to-month contract and you're not having a retainer that could cover it, you would likely have to go lighter with it, right? There is a lot of
good point
research, a lot of strategy that goes into this that, like we said earlier, you can't always just follow a process for. I know that might sound a little redundant that I said this process and then you can't follow a process, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So keeping in mind also what your client needs based on their level of engagement and going through it that way. We built this process for clients that are scaling or ready to scale or at the enterprise level that are needing either a new product rollout or are needing a lift on their overall performance because things have gotten pretty static that way as well. And so we build that plan, we share it with the client, we get approval, and then we go into the first go of briefing. And we look at how we can build out the first round of creative. Generally, we don't just kind of throw a dart at the wind in terms of which messaging themes we're going to go based off of, right? It can depend in two areas, or it can go in two areas. One is if we have any messaging themes that the client has provided, like I said, with the skincare brand, that they did this research from that major retailer, and we want to test those out. And then two is we've done research. We've looked for frequency ratios of the things that we're researching. So let's go with our highest potential opportunity, which is going to be the things that were talked about the most, the things that people mention the most, and see how we can get people in top of funnel that way as well. But so that's just kind of a high level overview. But Charlie, any thoughts on, when you go about actually selecting things from the 90-day plan to then add on to the brief, what that process generally looks like for you?
No, nothing to add really. I mean, that time up front in the 90-day plan is really important to, select the types of messaging and the types of visual executions or creative themes that you're going to start playing around with. And then I tend to, go down that route. One of the things that you did recently, actually, on one of our most recent onboarding calls that I thought was really great, was you actually asked the client, hey, do you want to see this brief before it goes to the designer so you can make sure that we're on the right path? And he was like, actually, that would be really valuable. And I think that, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but it comes down to being dynamic. I think you need to look at the client who's in front of you, and the more dynamic you are to serving the client to those needs, honestly, the better the experience is for the client, which is so important, but also the better the experience is for you as an agency, because sure, sharing the brief up front takes, maybe adds an extra day or two to the process if you've got to wait for your client to review it. But what's 1 or 2 days to the process if that, you know,
Causes me to
curtails any
churn.
potential issues?
Yeah.
Exactly. The amount it will save in amends down the line. And you know, from asking those questions and asking the right questions, you know, we've got other clients who I'm sure they barely even look at the creatives. They just approve everything that we do. But that comes with months and months and months of working together, building trust, proving that we have the right ideas by the performance showing them, hey, these creatives perform, it's great. So that doesn't come overnight. Of course it doesn't. But there are lots of clients where they wouldn't be interested in seeing the brief. They'd be like, I'm way too busy for that. And also, I know you know what you're doing, so just go with it. So that process doesn't look the same for every single client. And it's a funny one because I think with the media buying, you can do really, really similar processes. But with creative, clients have such vastly different expectations and needs that you have to pivot to the client that's in front of you.
Yeah, and that's where too, not following process too tight and allowing for a little bit of margin and delays or in feedbacks comes in too, where, you know, we have our onboarding form. Our onboarding form asks for a brand guide. And if they do not have a brand guide, we want to know the words to avoid and the text to not use and this and that, right? Brands don't always have that list of words or that thing. And I've been the client before in the sense of, you know, we have a copywriter and he started writing for Brighter Click to do content. And, you know, I had a list of like, don't use the term guru and things like that. But there was other terms that he would write and I would say, okay, let's push it. But in the future, let's not use this word. And we both understood we were learning as we go. It's the same with our client relationships. And
Totally.
one thing that we're looking at rolling out in the near future is a creative approval software. So we're not having to use Google Drive and things like that and Google Sheets. And the one that we're looking at, or the ones that we're looking at, have a feature to where they store client feedback and then create checklists or lists based off of that so that you can then have that for your internal review going forward as well. And I think that's going to be huge for us.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, as well, what comes to my mind to get here is like what Dina was saying. So we chatted on the last but one, anyway, one of the previous episodes with Dina, who is the creative strategist and brand side in True Classic, and she was talking a lot about this kind of dynamic element to managing clients. And what she really talked about a lot, which really resonated with me, is humility. So kind of having those conversations that are like, okay, if we're on the wrong track, no problem. Let's get on a call. Let's brainstorm it. You tell me exactly where I've gone wrong and put me right. I'll come with loads of other ideas, or not loads, but I'll come with other ideas to like be proactive as well. And it's having that humility. And like you said, you know, you maybe said don't use the word guru. He found another word, but you didn't like that one either. But you're like, okay, well, let's run it, but let's just not use that again. And it's having that partnership. And that's what I think is really paramount in all of this. You talk so much about rapport building, and it's so, so important. It's almost more important than the rest of it, because when you have a good rapport and a good relationship and a good partnership, it's more likely to withstand the rough times of that creative package didn't do very well. And the client can have humility and be like, okay, you know, they're not all going to perform great, right? Let's get back on track with it on the next one. Whereas if you don't have a good rapport in a relationship, that could be the end of a partnership, you know? And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the rapport, the partnership, and having humility on both sides.
Yeah, and it takes a bit of emotional intelligence on both sides as well, and, you know, full empathy on if a client doesn't have media buying background or creative strategy background of, you know, not getting the, you know, target creative success rate. Like we were talking about that recently. If you have 10 creatives and generally there's a 20 to 30% creative success rate for just creatives in Facebook, you're going to get 2 to 3 ads that are going to perform. And then 7 to 8 are going to have to get cut off, right? Well, that can seem like we just really dropped the ball, right? But having that emotional intelligence to like see, okay, this team, they're really putting a lot of effort forward. They're doing it. You know, it's not like the agencies we've worked with in the past where it's kind of lack of communication and no proactive project management, and just being receptive to seeing how things might be in a certain skill set or things like that.
And you know what that makes me think of as well? I think that's where putting in the amount of work up front that we do with the creative research deck, with the
Mhm.
90-day plan, with everything we've just talked about in this episode, that's sets up the foundation for you to have that amazing partnership. Because, you know, pretty much every single research deck actually that I've done and we've presented to a client, the feedback has been, wow, no one has taken the time to understand our industry and our brand the way that you have. And again, it's a pat on the back, but it's genuine, like for real. Like, we've got the call recordings, we've got the receipts,
I was
we
gonna
can
say,
prove
I'll just
it.
like hit a button and just now for like 3 clients, we'll have that play really quick.
Yeah. But I think that's exactly what sets it up. Like, you know, for when things don't work, the client can be like, okay, this isn't like other agencies. I know that they're not trying to cut corners. I know that they're not just, I don't know, using templates or like throwing a cookie cutter approach at me, but don't actually care or understand my business. Like, because that research process at the front end shows how much we care. It shows how much we've taken the time to learn. It shows our understanding of their business, their industry. And so if the first package doesn't land at a good rate, okay, well, no worries, let's try the next thing on the list, because that's just kind of the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, and I know we're getting to the top of the hour here, but just to kind of close that out and share something with you, you haven't heard yet, but I shared it with our head of paid media, Safe, earlier. I was one-on-one chatting with the co-founder of the jewelry brand that we were mentioning in this call, and asked him how things were going with the team so far. And his main point of contact, Safe, he said, great. Obviously, we have the same philosophy on media buying. The team is good, and we're actually getting sales on TikTok. It was a hard task I gave you all, making TikTok work. If it doesn't, I'm sure that it's that TikTok doesn't work for us and not that you guys botched it. And those, if there's any
Wow.
brands out there listening, those types of comments, those types of feedback really do change the energy and the temperature within an agency as well. Like
Yes,
it really does,
100%.
because um, just like the negative clients can change the energy and make things not good, like those, I think those stand out more than the negative impact the negative create.
Totally agree. Yeah. Because we work hard and we care, you know,
Yeah.
like if we were a team, and I think your ethos on this is really the same as mine. If I feel like a member of my team doesn't work hard and doesn't care, they're not going to be my team anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it's as simple as that. And we do work hard and we do really care. And that's why those positive bits of feedback have such a huge, you know, effect. And to say that, you know, how long have we been working with them now? What are we, like 6 weeks in?
Mm-hmm.
For them to say, if it doesn't work on TikTok, it's because it's a TikTok brand, you know, it's a channel problem. It's not a you problem. For him to say that so early on is such a testament to how hard the team have worked, and like
Mm-hmm.
the trust that we've built, the rapport, the partnership, all those things that we just talked about in just 6 weeks. And I really believe it's because part of that is because of all of the work that we do up front to make it a success. We've proven to him that, yeah, we've made him believe in us and him believe that we can make it a success. And if we can't, then it's not an us problem, it's a TikTok problem. And that
Mm-hmm.
there's no higher praise than that.
I love it. Well, this has been a good chat. We have finally wrapped up the high level process for creative strategy part 2.